What do I mean by extreme perspective? Well, perspective is simply how something looks from a particular spot. So when we talk about extreme perspective, we're really talking about when we're looking at something from an unusual angle, unusual in some way. Maybe it's from very high looking down, or maybe, as in this instance, it's because we're very close and we're looking up, instead of a more common straight on, or at least more side on view. And because we're viewing from a more extreme position, the distortions that we get are going to be more extreme. And that can make a scene such as this seem daunting because it looks less familiar. But the important thing to tell ourselves before we start is that every drawing is simply line upon line. And the good thing about a viewing position that makes the building look unfamiliar is that it forces us to actually observe it more carefully, because we're still just looking and then drawing what we see. But what are the important things to look at when we look at an extreme perspective angle? With any perspective view, I like to work out where is eye level. So eye level is where all of these angled lines becomes horizontal. And so here it's still angled, here it's still angled, though not very much, and here it's angled in the other direction. So eye level is going to be about here. And these upper perspective angles are very extreme. I mean, look at this angle. It's much closer to the vertical than the horizontal. And so these are the lines that it can be hard to draw because they seem too steep when we go to draw them, that they can't possibly be right. So paying really careful attention to the perspective angles is probably the most important thing. The other important thing, though, is to pay attention to what can be familiar shapes, how they look from this particular viewing point. So particularly things such as these arches, where the extreme position that we view them from makes them look a lot less like a semicircle and more just like a curve. Things such as columns and column capitals that we can see a little bit up the top here look very different. Now, because we're quite close to the building, there's a fair amount of vertical perspective distortion, the effect when lines angle inwards on the vertical, as well as on the horizontal. Now, the effect of this has been magnified by lens distortion, but to keep things simple in this, I'm going to draw the distortion that the lens has provided because I think it actually adds to the visual drama of the scene. It increases the feeling of verticality in what we're looking at. So as always, I'm going to start with the element which gives me the chance to draw it most accurately and in proportion, which is going to be this column here. And I notice that it is sloping slightly towards the right. Just as I like to work out where the horizontal eye level is, I also like to work out what I call the vertical eye level is, which is where we have a vertical line. So this line slopes slightly to the left and this line slightly to the right. So this is the spot here where we have a vertical line. There isn't particularly an actual line there in the building, but that's no problem. And it's pretty much the spot directly in front of the camera. But we can't assume it's going to be in the center of the photo because the photo may have been cropped, which will shift it to one side. Let's start. So I start with this column and try and get the proportions and the angle as accurate as I can. And then it's just pushing out slightly and drawing the lines around it, especially these vertical lines to the right, which are very close, because I want to establish some of these diagonal perspective angles as quickly as I can. Because until I've got a sense of those, it's going to be very hard to progress the drawing. So I'm really just doing enough of the detail to let me draw these horizontal lines angling up to the right. And it does take longer because I do need to force myself to make these lines as extreme in angle as I can. Once I've got a couple of them firmly in place, then I know that every line above that will need to at least slightly increase in angle, and it becomes easier to do when there are some other lines that look okay on the paper. I'm also trying to be very careful with this foreshortening off to the left-hand side of the building. Because of the extreme angle, it's not just the horizontal perspective angles that are extreme, but the foreshortening is also extreme. the building, if you like, disappears out of sight very quickly. And so if I'm not careful, just wanting to draw some of the detail that I can see, I make every bit of the detail just a little bit too wide, and then I end up with a building that's a lot too long on that side. So I need to be careful with that as well. And so I get these first couple of arches, probably the major architectural element besides that nearest column that we see. Now I also need to keep a sense of the size, the proportion of these lower, larger elements as well. Because there are all these motorbikes and motor scooters up against the wall, I can't draw too much of the detail, but I want to at least work out how far it's going, because when I come to position these pedestrians, then you'll see that I need to know exactly what's happening. I didn't realize till after I'd made this video that the note I made for myself to take some eggs to one of my children in the afternoon made it onto the video as well on my hand. So sorry about that. I'm now working at these vertical lines just on the right hand side. These to me aren't as important at getting the extreme angle correct, because they're partly caused by lens distortion, and if they're a little more on the vertical, I don't think it's going to affect the drawing at all. In fact, it may even make it look a little less strange. But certainly these horizontal angles are ones that we see at this angle in life, and therefore it is important that we get them as extreme as they are. Another thing to watch out for is when we've put a couple of these horizontal angles in place with extreme angles, is that they end up being closer together than we think they should be. When we look at the detail that needs to get drawn in there, we think of the detail being seen more head on, and so it's easy to think that it needs to be a bit higher. Work very hard at not letting it get too high, because if it's higher than it should be, it will give the feeling that the building is toppling towards us into the street. If we're going to make a mistake, it's better that we actually make the mistake of not enough space between these highly angled horizontal lines. That way, at least, the building will sit back a little bit too much, but it won't generate the same alarm as thinking it's about to fall on us does. Now, I need to put the lines on this decorative column or decorative corner, and I do mess those up a little bit. I don't do them as carefully as I should, and I just don't quite get the top ones angled enough. And when you see me do it, you'll see me fiddle around with them a bit and manipulate the upper ones quite a bit, just trying to push them to be slightly more angled. They're not quite where they should be, but they're certainly greatly improved when I finish them compared to how it started. So I wasn't quite as ready to do those as I thought when I began to say that. So as you can see, with this far end of the building, there's very little to really draw. And what little we do draw, it's best to keep a really light touch with it so that it doesn't come forward too much. We really want this building to feel like it's going back a long way on this far edge. If we get the outlines correct, only need to do the barest suggestion of the architectural detail, and we can't even really draw any architectural elements, not recognizable ones. It's really just adding a few lines to create the effect. So here you see me now working with these, and as you can see, when they get to the top, they don't angle up quite sharply enough. And so now I'm trying to rework the angles a little bit and just make it look not quite so obvious. Still fiddling with those lines, but because these lines are quite thick, it does give me scope to adjust the angle. So that's always a good thing with a thick line. So now I've got this top level, this third level, and although I can look at this and work out, yep, these are columns with arches between them, I'm really not going to be drawing any columns or any arches. What's more important than anything else is to get the sense of repeated shapes rather than recognizable shapes, if that makes sense. such as these capitals that overhang a little bit, and therefore we can see them when we can't see the columns that go under them much at all. And if there are some little shadows that appear regularly, it's good to make sure we just draw the little shadows in. We don't have to even know what architectural elements are causing those shadows. And I've got these very extreme angled lines up the top. Now, this uppermost one is actually a neighbouring building. It's not the building that I've been drawing, so I need to make that very light because I do want that to sit back, well back behind this building, and also behind the leaves that are in the top left hand corner. I do intend to draw the trees. Oh, here I go with the leaves. I feel like they took me almost as long as the building. If we're going to draw trees at all, we need to understand that there is a commitment, a time commitment in doing that. So here I go with that. Even though there's no extreme perspective, it still is something that requires concentration. And these are leaves of a giant plane tree which are up this street of Sydney, and I want to try and somehow capture the sense of what tree it is by the vague shape of the leaves, the way the leaves hang off the branches, and the way the branches form. And there's another larger tree of the same type further up the street. So I want to be suggesting that too, and I want to draw the people and give the sense that there's a footpath that goes right up out of sight. So I need to work out exactly how much detail I need to draw to show that, and that it is a busy CBD street without cluttering things too much and making it hard to read the overall drawing, hard to get a sense of, okay, this is this as a main thing. And in this drawing, of course, it's the sense of I'm really close to a nice old facade. Trying to position these foreground things, I decided I best put these two closest figures in, because I then want to work across and do these lowest courses of stone and these motorbikes that up against the wall. I didn't really want to draw the motorbikes, not my favourite sort of subject, and it's a bit hard to make out exactly their shapes. But in the end, I thought they were part of the feel of the scene and the street. So I thought I'd do my best to create the effect. So I'm not drawing motorbikes or motor scooters, whatever they're called. I'm trying to draw the effect of the shapes that I see from them. The shapes that are particularly catching the light. And also the shapes that are in silhouette, such as the rear view mirrors that stand up above the handlebars on a couple of them. They're the sort of things where if we get those details right, that will tell the brain of someone looking at the drawing, oh, that's a motorbike or a motor scooter. So sometimes we don't need to actually capture much detail precisely for someone looking at it to now know very quickly and very exactly what the whole object is. Again, this is my sense of drawing the effect of what we see, not necessarily drawing the exactness of it. So now I'm filling in some more of the pedestrians on the street, and now the far end of the street. Now there is a back of a head down in the lower left corner, and all the while I'm drawing these parts, I'm now wondering, am I going to draw it in or not? Am I going to draw it in or not? And I wasn't going to draw it in, and then in the end at the last minute I added some more details to the upper right, and so you'll see me do that in a moment. And that made me think, oh, look, I'll now put the head in the lower left so as to balance this extra bit of building in the upper right. But I actually think it was a big mistake, and I think it looked better before I put that head in. It just sort of anchored that bottom left corner too strongly, and I think therefore drew attention away from the building, which was where I wanted it to be. What do you think? Do you think it works better with that head when I place it in the lower left, or better without it? Let me know in the comments. I would be interested to see if anyone at all thinks it works better with that head there, or whether it just creates too much line work drawing the eye in that bottom left corner. I think I could probably improve it slightly if I drew more of the leaf in the top left corner as well, just to pull that more towards the left hand side above the person's head.
So there I am putting that. Let me know what you think, whether I should have put it or not. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this helpful. Don't be put off doing extreme perspectives. It just means we need to do more careful observation so that we end up drawing the lines that we see in the positions that we see them, and we don't think we know what we've seen when we haven't yet looked at it closely enough to be able to tell for sure. And here you see me drawing this head here. But whatever you're drawing and however you're drawing it, make sure you're having fun. And if you want to have a go drawing this, I've put the photos on my YouTube community page. So you can print them off and have a go yourself and see how you go drawing a perspective as extreme as this one.
I'm Stephen Travers. I'll see you next time. Bye.